One final question we have to ask before we actually start looking at the Gospels themselves is a simple question: what are they? What are the Gospels exactly? How do we understand them? Specifically, what is their genre? And before you sit here and think, well, why does it matter? Let's just understand. When we talk about a genre sets our expectations for how we interpret a work. So, genre allows us to communicate through conventions of communication here. It forms a compact between a author and a recipient and a reader. And so those things kind of help us understand how to interpret the Gospels. So the word gospel here comes from the Greek word euangelion. All right, so euangelion, with its cognate verb euangelizomai, which denotes here the saving acts of God through Jesus Christ, His Son. And probably toward the end of the first century or early second century, titles were added to these Gospels that recognize these accounts, these documents, as authoritative accounts of the Gospel, of God's saving work in His Son, Jesus Christ. And so we see in the second century, Justin Martyr is the first author to use the word gospel to refer to these canonical accounts. And these titles preserve the unity of the gospel. It's the gospel according to Mark, the gospel according to Matthew, the gospel according to Luke. That's in the Greek you get kata, that's often attached to kata markon, according to Mark, kata Matthaion, kata Lukon, kata Ioannes. And so they understood that the gospel was the same. The uniqueness, however, was in what Mark was telling us and the way he was presenting it, these facts about Jesus and what happened here. So the question is, as these early works, as these versions or these retellings of the gospel are occurring, how do we understand them in terms of their genre? Because we have many genres that we look at, and we have certain expectations. Well, we want to make sure we're approaching the text on its own terms and its own things. So there have been different proposals here. K.L. Schmidt proposed it as popular literature, kleine literature there. Not as a literary work, a folk literature there. And what he said is these were more common. These were more common kind of things. And they were to be understood as distinct from more classical biographies. And so they could follow the rules of transmission, oral transmission, written transmission, these kinds of things. In a sense, though, they don't fit within a established literary genre. So that's a problem for Schmidt's proposal. Others ones have kind of pulled these as Greek eratology. Eratology. And these are stories of miraculous deeds of a godlike hero. And so you got Haydas and Smith. These are an ancient type of biographical writing, a formal account of a remarkable career of an impressive teacher that was used as basis for his moral instruction. Now, here's the problem. We have no complete text surviving anything that would actually be called a Greek eratology there. In fact, we may just say it sort of describes tendencies in this kind of literary genre. Some have argued that it's more Jewish midrash, or what you may call rabbinic biography. Again, drawing on Jesus' role as teacher there, and understanding that his method of interpreting the Bible was characterized by his use of allusions, citations, citations of the text to support his position, his religious teaching there. The problem is, there are no rabbinic parallels existing that shows that this was anything that existed in that sense. So, when we deal with this, we're dealing with something that, in a lot of ways, people have tried to put into categories that just don't fit. And so we're going to go with what's often known as Greco-Roman bioi, or what might be called Greco-Roman lives. In this sense, it's a biographical kind of work, but it's within Greco-Roman understandings of literature and how this works. These often contain kind of childhood development, education, characteristics, the motivations, and sometimes they even had chronological precision. But those aspects were not universal. The genre of biography, or lives, or bioi here, was a very broad term in the ancient world, specifically in the first century there. Most modern scholars would understand that literary critics would note that this genre does not have a rigid set of requirements. It's a very loose kind of thing. It's as Burge will say, it's a very flexible set of expectations. So, this is what's unique about this approach. Now, so that means when we read this, we're going to have to read this Greco-Roman bioi on its own terms, with its own set of expectations. So we understand these in some ways are unique. They are anonymous, although their names are later attached. They lack literary pretension. They're just meant to be straight down the pike. They're not trying to write in very flowery language. They're trying to write very clearly here. And so when we approach it, we have to make sure we're reading it on its own terms. We're not imposing our standards of how lives or biographies should be written. We're reading it on their terms. And the first we need to understand is we often have this category that we believe things should be, but they did not share it. This one of objectivity. Objectivity. Modern readers often expect biographies. Quite honestly, if you've read a biography, some of them are just dry. They try to be so objective. They lose the compelling story. Right? That's why sometimes when you see a modern biography that doesn't do that, oh my goodness, it's like somebody has just invented something new. Ancient authors had no misgivings that they were trying to be objective. They believed, and this is something that we have to come to understand too, they believed something could be true without you being objective about it. Like this modern notion of being absolutely detached and having no feelings, they did not share that. But they believed it could still be true even if you weren't objective. So it was also very common for them to interject meaning, to interject interpretation about the events of their writings, which we see in the Gospels. And so one of the things that we should be careful of is that we don't sit there and look, well, it's not objectively written like our modern biographies, and somehow discount that. They didn't expect it to be. They understood that objectivity in that sense is a farce. It doesn't really work. So we can understand that these can be not objectively written, but true in their writing. So there we go. The second one, we often have this, but we want to understand that they don't necessarily have it. They do not follow Let me put a no. No, they do not follow a strict chronology. It was not uncommon for an author to group things thematically. In fact, we see this in the Gospels. Well, we see this in those Gospels quite frequently. While they want to view things, we want to see things as kind of an unfolding of time, A to B to C to D to E to F. That's not how they wanted to see it at all. They didn't expect there to be a strict chronology. We could group things thematically. We could group things in different ways also, around geographic areas as well. And so that's a sense in which we are dealing with something that is unique here, and we need to understand it on its own terms. You may sit there and you look, Matthew and Mark and Luke, they may have a difference about how things are ordered because they may be organizing their things not strictly chronologically. They may be ordering them thematically or geographically. And so that's one of those things where we often struggle, but they did not at all. And so again, we're approaching it on its own time. And finally, they understood here a combination of teaching and action. Jesus both teaches and acts. It's not just his teaching, and it's not just his action. It's a combination of both. And what's unique here when we think about the way that the Gospels put up, they make the Gospels show us from time to time what Jesus teaches and then how he does it reinforce one another. When we look at the Gospel of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount ends with this kind of thing. And the people were amazed because he taught as one having authority, not as their teaching of the law. And then the next chapters go through Jesus exercising his authority, healing, casting out demons. See, all of those things. And so the combination of teaching and action is a central part of these works there. And so what we have to understand when we approach them, again, approaching them on their own terms. In some sense, they are unique in the ancient world. That's not to say that they're completely unintelligible there, but they would lightly understood them as a life, as a biography of sorts of this ancient figure. This ancient figure, they're trying to show Jesus Christ, again, not objective in the sense of detached, but showing truly that he is the Son of God who has come to save the world. So that's how we have to approach it. And we just need to be aware that that's what the Gospels are as we seek to engage them faithfully.